All right, folks, it's time for another installment of Who Says No on Salt City Hoops. We did this last week, and I kind of held back all of the John Collins trade proposals that you all had submitted and kind of joked that I was being cowardly in doing so. I did that largely because I wanted to try to understand how real those rumors of Jazz interest were. When people like Shams and Stein and Fisher, they're well respected, and if they say that they're hearing something somewhere, then they heard it. But just from a track record standpoint, I don't know that they're always as connected to the Jazz side of rumors, to the Jazz perspective. But then Tony Jones reported it. And look, we all know Tony. We know he's a great guy, good friend. Um, we all know that Tony is right more often than he's wrong when he reports what he's hearing about the Jazz's roster building ideas and perspectives. So hearing him add his voice to that made me sit up and really start to imagine why the Jazz would be interested in Collins, and also why, according to Tony and others, they also want some compensation involved if they take him in a trade. So, first of all, let's talk about John Collins as sort of a precursor to getting into your ideas. Um, he's a guy who, over the last 3 seasons, has averaged 16 and 8. He had 2 seasons prior to that, by the way, where he averaged 20 and 10 and then 22 and 10. I tend to put a little bit more stock in the 16 and 8 years, partially because when he was averaging 20 and 10, Atlanta wasn't really very good yet. Um, so then they started to get better, and then that's when, in the ecosystem of a more competitive team, he kind of settles into a nice 16 and 8 level, which is really good, by the way. And so that's just sort of why I think if you're projecting where he's going to fit into a competitive roster, I would say 16 and 8 is probably something you can budget more comfortably. He's sort of been an average 3 point shooter at 35% over the last 3 seasons, and actually kind of trending in the wrong direction. He's gone down in each of the last 3 years. But 35% is certainly workable for a 6'9" guy, right? Certainly makes your offense better to have that spacing component. Um, Overall, his efficiency is still above average. Again, it's also trending down, but 62% true shooting over that span is solid. So, overall, I would say he's probably not someone in his current state who really changes your reality. I don't think he's someone who you get him and go, okay, now we've got Collins and Markkanen, so we can sort of call off the rebuild and just go start contending for titles. I don't think he's that level of player at today. He's also 25, and I personally don't like putting sort of artificial limits or ceilings on 25-year-olds that are still learning about their games. Um, but that's kind of how I project him. Having said that, it's easy to see the outlines there of what would be a really useful complementary player, especially given that he's the size. He's 25. He's got a positive wingspan. A 6'11" wingspan on that 6'9" body. Um, I think also, he's someone who you could imagine him complementing Lowry Markkanen well, which is going to start to be an important part of the equation for any prospective fit, right? Because of Lowry Markkanen's all-star jump. And I think, because Lowry's 7 feet but plays kind of like a wing, the Jazz use him as a hybrid 3 or 4 mostly. Um, it's actually useful that Collins is 6'9" with a 6'11" wingspan and plays kind of as a hybrid 4 or 5, because I think you can shift those guys around. It gives you some flexibility in terms of ways to imagine your front line. Um, if the Jazz start to believe that Walker Kessler can be like really good, like 32 minutes a night into perpetuity good, then you can say, because of that positional flexibility with Lowry and Collins, you could still imagine, those three kind of being the front court of the future. Um, if instead they picture Walker Kessler as being someone who's kind of more like solid good, regular good, then they have the optionality to build things a little bit like the Clippers, where they have Zubats for when they want to play, 20, 25, sometimes more minutes a night with a rim protecting, diving big who plays with size and protects the paint. But they also have the optionality to play someone like Marcus Morris or Robert Covington at center and play 5 out and switch everything. So, I think for all those reasons, John Collins is interesting, right? Um, And it's why, after hearing Tony talk about it, I'm kind of more leaning towards, yeah, I think there could be some real Jazz interest here. But why then, having said all of that, um, why are Tony and others saying that the Jazz are asking for a pick in return for this player who's interesting and could complement Markkinen and could give the future roster some interesting looks. And the money, the answer comes down to money. So first of all, here's what Tony said in Tony's article at the Athletic last week. He wrote, "The Jazz previously, but not recently, offered guard Malik Beasley and forward Jared Vanderbilt for Collins, but have also asked for a first round pick to be attached to the deal." He goes on to say that the Hawks have declined that offer, according to sources, and that those people think that the Jazz and Hawks will probably revisit this before the deadline on February 9th. Um, so yeah, the Jazz's request for a pick comes down to money. It's the fact that John Collins is just starting a 4-year, $102 million contract. He's set to make he makes 23.5 million this year. Obviously, the Hawks have already paid the majority of that, but it continues to rise until 2025, 2026, when he has a player option at more than 26.5 million. And look, the cap's rising. Maybe that number is not going to sound as scary in a couple of years when the new TV deal is in place and cap figures are higher. But even as the cap rises, mid 20s, you're talking about like not quite star money, but you're talking about like high level starter money right there. You're like you're talking about a level that, as we just broke down, like Collins is probably not someone who's changing your reality. At 26 million for a player who's not really going to define the way you play, um, like that's a little uncomfortable. That's like this isn't a bad contract in the sense of like, someone who's out of the rotation in Miami making 17 million a year, but this is a contract that um, the Jazz probably, if I'm guessing and reading the tea leaves correctly here with the reporting, the Jazz probably feel like this is an interesting player who's attached to a contract that makes him a little bit more challenging of an asset, and I think that is why the request is there for draft compensation as well as whatever players the Jazz would send in the deal. So having said that, and knowing that Tony is reporting that sort of the starting point of the framework was Beasley Vando for Collins and a pick. And I hate, by the way, that we have to speculate and name names. Like these are real people. Like I'm a dude in my living room talking about whether these real humans are going to have to pack up all their belongings and drag their families to a different place. That sucks. It's also sort of not only part of the business, but part of covering and following and talking about the Utah Jazz because of where they're at as a franchise, like talking about how they're going to assemble the next contending core of the Utah Jazz is just it's going to include conversations like this. So sorry Malik, sorry Vando, sorry about all the other guys we have named and will name as we continue this Who Says No series. Um, but yeah, I mean, the bottom line is if that's sort of the starting point, let's look at your ideas and how you've kind of riffed off of that and take a guess on who is going to say no to 5 different John Collins trade scenarios. This first one comes from, I assume his name is Josh. The handle is OMG Josh is me. He has Collins going to the Jazz along with, there's that pick that the Jazz are reportedly seeking, and the Hawks in exchange get Jordan Clarkson and Kelly Olynyk. A couple months ago, I think that sack pick might have had some real value, but now suddenly they're number 3 in the West with a young core, and now you really have to wonder where that pick lands in 2024, right? Given that, I'm not sure that the Jazz um, would prefer to put in Jordan Clarkson and KO, 2 players who might have value on their own, into the deal for what could wind up being a pretty low value first round pick. Um, Atlanta might be reluctant too because reportedly they're reluctant to include a first at all. So when you're in a scenario where both sides feel a little bit screwed, you're actually ironically probably pretty close. For me, I think that this is probably one where it's too much for the Jazz. I think you know, first of all, I think the Jazz are reluctant to move Jordan Clarkson at all. He's not untouchable, but we know how much ownership likes him. If they do trade him, I think that there will be some real offers out there, involving young players and or picks. Kelly Olynyk reportedly has a lot of suitors, and I think the Jazz could, he's in a salary range where you could do some interesting things. You could either get a nice player on a mid-tier salary, or you could do a second draft thing on someone making less. Um, you could, I don't know that Kelly Olynyk gets you a first on his own, but there are some possibilities with those two guys. So to give them up, this is a higher value that the Jazz are putting into the deal than what Tony reported. So I'm gonna lean right now on the side of the Jazz say no here. Although again, if if the if the Hawks would be reluctant too, maybe this one isn't terribly far off. This next one is an interesting scenario from Jazzman 47. I love 47. He's a good follow. He's fun to interact with. Um, and so he takes that concept that's been reported, the Beasley Vando for Collins and a pick scenario that Tony reported on, and he kind of riffs off that, but adds Cleveland into the deal so that the Hawks get Karis LeVert. Obviously, from the Jazz perspective, it sounds, if we take Tony's reporting at face value, like this is a version that they would do. Um, this is from their perspective, this isn't any different than what they proposed. It's just that now the Hawks probably get, I think the Hawks get a better deal out of this because Levert is a little bit more of a complete offensive player. He's got better size, but because of that, I just wonder why the Cavs would do this. There's not a huge size difference between Levert and Beasley. Levert's like 6'5", 6'7". Beasley's 6'4", 6'5". But there is a length difference, and there's kind of a functional size difference. And the Cavs are already small. They already have two small guards that are starting. Plus, Ricky Rubio's healthy now and coming off their bench. So um, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the Cavs would view Levert to Beasley as an upgrade, and if they don't, I'm not entirely sure why they would do it without some kind of compensation heading their way. There's also an asterisk on that Atlanta pick because Atlanta can't actually trade its own 2024 in an unconditional way. They already have a pick outgoing in 2025. They do have an extra pick coming in next year, which, if it were unprotected, would mean they could trade their own pick. But that pick that they have incoming from Sacramento has cascading protections, so they could figure something out. They could make it. They could offer the Jazz the most favorable of the two, whatever picks they own next year, the most favorable outside the lottery or something like that. Atlanta would probably prefer it to be the least favorable outside the lottery, but I'm just saying that that's workable. But I put the asterisk there to satisfy the nerds who are checking my work and saying, I know that Atlanta 2024 first can't actually go in an unprotected, uncaveated way. So there's that one from 47. Thanks for submitting that, 47. Um, Similar here, except that in this one, the Jazz keep Beasley out of the deal. Instead, they include THT, who does less and earns about the same money. So that's obviously better for the Jazz. They also get to include Rudy Gay, which saves them some money next year because of Rudy Gay's player option that he's pretty sure to pick up. So from a Jazz perspective, this is undoubtedly better than just Vando and Beasley. But then this version doesn't have a pick coming back. Um, from the Suns' perspective, this deal is Crowder for Gay and Vanderbilt. They are known to have some interest in Vando, but I'm not sure if Vando plus Gay matches what they want to get for Jay Crowder. Crowder's value is pretty low right now because he hasn't been playing, but Gay is, if we're honest, Gay is probably a negative asset. Not probably. Rudy Gay right now is not producing. The game in Portland aside, he is not producing up to the tax MLE deal he's on. He's still owed money for a season and a half, assuming he opts into that player option. So, that's a rough one. And I would guess that the Suns probably are hoping to get better than a Gay Vando type offer in exchange for Crowder. I'm not sure if they will. Um, will the Heat wind up doing something like Oladipo in a second, or will Memphis offer something, or will there are teams out there that are interested in Jay Crowder. So from the Suns' perspective, this probably just comes down to what do those other offers look like, and is this something that could compete with that? The Suns for me are a hard maybe on this one. The team that I think this is hardest to justify from their angle. This is from Cameron C. Phillips. The team that I think says no to your proposal, Cameron, is the Hawks. So they're giving up John Collins. They're not giving up a pick here, which is probably good for them. But I just don't know that they would do, Collins for Crowder and THT. Um, Again, they supposedly like Crowder, but TAT is on kind of an overpriced deal where Talon controls the lever on next year with that player option. Um, you could make the argument that it is useful in the NBA to break a bigger salary into two smaller salaries, just as you're imagining future deals. Like, um, there are times where it's useful to have a couple. Crowder and THT both make low eight figures, and that can be useful when you're trying to cobble together a deal. So, I don't think that this is horrible for the Hawks, but Crowder and THT for Collins is probably selling a little low for them. Again, I don't think this one is super far off, but I do think it's helpful from a Jazz perspective because instead of doing Vando and Beasley, they're doing Vando and two negative assets. And I think the other two teams involved in this trade would kind of sniff that out and say, come on, Utah, like what else are you going to bring to this deal if you're going to attach two negative assets to Vando, who's like, fun and probably has some limited value, but like, Vanderbilt isn't changing anybody's world either. So I think this one is a little reachy from the Jazz perspective, even though I like it's probably not miles and miles away for the Suns and the Hawks, but I think it's hopeful from a Jazz fan perspective. Which brings us to these last two. A couple of people wanted to riff off of the rumor that the Clippers are still interested in Mike Conley. And both of these involve Luke Kennard. So let me just start with this. There's a lot of talk out there that the Clips want to upgrade their roster without giving up Luke Kennard. He's young and he's good and he's locked in on a pretty friendly deal. So, that's the kind of player that they probably don't want to put in the deal. But on the other hand, Conley provides a lot of what the Clippers precisely need to be really good. They've looked amazing in the last 15 to 20 games. Kawhi's starting to look like Kawhi again. Maybe they feel like this is just kind of the risk you have to take and the price you have to pay to be all in and to make a run at the title. I would probably be shocked if they traded Luke Kennard, and all they got out of that deal was 35-year-old Mike Conley for a season and a half and Justin Holiday. They'd also be putting Covington in the deal. Covington is, kind of complicated right now. He hasn't been producing very well, and he's also making a lot of money. So Covington might himself be a little bit of a negative asset. So again, from the Clippers' perspective, it's kind of Luke and like a neutral to negative asset in Rocco for basically Mike Conley, and I think that would be a tough sell for them unless they just really think they're like a point guard away, and maybe they do. Like that's there's a chance that that's true. This proposal, by the way, came from Rye_N_, which last time I referred to this individual as Ryan. I don't know if it's Ryan or Rin, but either way, thanks for the proposal. Mike Conley, might actually impact their title odds in a not insignificant way. The Hawks, from the Atlanta perspective, it's Collins and a pick for Rocco and Kennard. Kennard. I think that's okay for the Hawks. I think it might be slightly better than Vando and Beasley, just because Kennard is probably a better asset than Vando and Beasley. But it's in the ballpark for Atlanta. The Jazz might prefer that pick be a year other than 2023, just because I don't think their plan is to roster 4 first-round rookies next year. But I mean, whatever. Like picks move all the time, right? And the Jazz have a lot of time to sort of sort that out, and you can usually trade a pick for a future year's pick, or kick the can or something like that. Or at some point they might start using picks to go get players too. Who knows? I think that they'd probably do this, giving up Mike and getting Collins and a pick back. Um, Given where Mike is at in his career. By the way, like I say this, I said this last time. Like I'm a lover of Mike Conley. I'm a believer in Mike Conley. The impact that he has is palpable, even though he's statistically having a down year. Um, I hate the thought of watching Mike play for someone else. I hate the thought of his cute little family leaving our awesome state. Like all that stuff sucks, but I think that from an asset management standpoint, the Jazz would probably do their portion. The Hawks is a little more iffy, but in the ballpark of the Vando Beasley uh, proposal. And for me, the question here is whether the Clippers would include Kennard, or whether they'd need more to put a player like that, an asset like that, in the deal, which is the same issue I have on this last proposal by Fan for Utah. He wants Collins and Kennard going to the Jazz. So from the Jazz perspective, this is Conley, Kelly Olynyk, and Rudy Gay. Again, Rudy Gay probably a slightly negative element in this deal, like kind of a salary dump. Conley, Olynyk, Gay for John Collins and Kennard. No picks. From the Hawks' perspective, this deal is John Collins for Covington, Wall, and Gay, and from the Clippers' perspective, they do Kennard, Covington, and John Wall for two good but older veterans who would help the Clippers win now, but kind of damage their long term in the process. Again, I already spoke about the Clippers thing and the Kennard question. I'm really not sure where they'd come down on that. Um, I do think Conley and Olynyk would help them in the short term. But for me, this is a rough return for Atlanta, honestly. Like again, Covington is not a positive asset right now, with his production level compared to his salary. Um, John Wall has had some fun moments. He's making tax MLE money, and Rudy Gay is making tax MLE money, and I think Jazz fans know that that production hasn't always been there either. So, um, you know, if I'm the Hawks, I'm having a pretty hard time giving up 16 and 8 in a 25-year-old 6'9" positionally diverse player who's under contract. Yeah, he's under contract for kind of high money, but I'm having a hard time giving that up for three sort of distressed assets, three older veterans that don't even really help me now and certainly don't help me later. So for me, Fan for Utah, I'm for me this one is pretty far off from the Hawks' perspective. The Clippers, I don't pretend to know whether the Clippers would do it or not. I think that the Jazz probably would do something like this, but I can't imagine the Hawks saying yes to this one. So I'll stop there. That got all of the Collins scenarios out of the way. There's a lot more to talk about, so we'll definitely do at least one more of these episodes. I have to apologize to Jackpot Picks because he submitted a cool trade proposal that I was actually excited to talk about, but it involved Rui Hachimura, who's now been traded. So that is not an option that is on the table anymore. So sorry we didn't get to that one. Jackpot Picks. We still have 45 for MVPs proposal involving Kelly Olynyk to the Pelicans. He submitted that other one that we previewed for you involving the Bucks, seeing if the Jazz could get a young player and a pick for Jordan Clarkson. Clark Soldering wants to see if he can get a young player and a pick to the Jazz from the Grizzlies. And then we have some Clipper scenarios we'll still talk through. Um, Liquefy, I think it's pronounced, um, like went for it to see if he could get the Jazz OG Anunoby. We'll talk about that one. And then Stephen J. Phelps wants to kind of calibrate around what it would really take for the Jazz to even like have the conversation about Larry Markkanen's availability, which we talked about a little bit last time. Stephen J. Phelps goes a little bit farther to see if he can coax me into, um, considering doing something wacky. So we'll talk about all those next time. This one has been a John Collins focused episode of Who Says No here at Salt City Hoops. We'll do at least one more of these as the trade deadline approaches. So thanks so much for joining us.